All right. So welcome everyone. This is our inaugural science communication series that we're trying to lift up in the T32. So as people know, this is part of our renewal and our new journey for the next 5 years. We've added this element of science communication, developing skills, learning about this field of work, learning from other people who are really figuring out how to communicate to wider audiences outside of academia, policymakers, community. So we're hoping that this is one of many activities that we'll do over the next 5 years as we move to this field. And this is a new area for me as well. So I'm also turning this opportunity to get trained with the trainees on this area. So I think it'll be excellent to move it. And I couldn't, and definitely I see Rebecca already put stuff on the chat. Definitely I couldn't think of a better person to start us off in this journey than Beth Prusaczyk in this work. So I'm going to do a little introduction, Beth, and then we'll have you going. We have an hour, so basically it's to do like a 30-minute presentation, a little bit more if you need to, and then to take some questions, and I'll be moderating your time and the comments in the chat. And if people have questions throughout, just put them in the chat, and I will make sure to help with that moderating the discussion. And Beth, you would like to take questions as you go along or at the end?
Whatever works.
Whatever works.
Yeah, doesn't matter to me.
Love it, love it, love the flexibility. Great. So we'll see how it goes. So Dr. Beth Prusaczyk is an instructor at the Institute of Informatics and in General Medicine Sciences here at the Washington University School of Medicine. Beth is an implementation scientist who specializes in improving healthcare for vulnerable older adults, such as those living in rural areas and with dementia, by understanding how to better implement existing research findings into practice and policy. Her work focuses on how system science, existing healthcare data, and health information technology can both inform and speed the implementation process. She received her PhD and MSW from the Brown School, and I am very proud to say that she was an NIMH T32 pre-doctoral trainee and an alumni of our great program. And she completed a postdoctoral training at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She also served, which I found this fascinating, I would love to talk to you about this. She also served in 2018 and 2019 Health and Aging Policy Fellow, serving on the Special Committee on Aging in the United States Senate. And Beth is also a former journalist and has a bachelor's degree in journalism, which is where her interest in science communication comes from. So we're very happy that you're sharing some time with us, and please take it away, Beth. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, and I should also introduce, because you'll hear him and you'll see him, my cat Carl, because he is forever here. And if I try and shut him out of the room, he just screams at the door. So it's easier to just have him in the room. And I know there are cat lovers on this call, so you can just get some extra cats in your day. I am super excited to talk to you all today about science communication. I didn't realize I was the inaugural sort of talk for this long-term initiative, which is great that it is going to be a long-term initiative, because I love science communication, think it's so important, as I will explain. And also I'm glad that you're going to get more than just this, because I'm really kind of hitting the highlights, because we don't have, a whole long period of time to discuss this. So I'm glad that you'll be able to dive deep into some of these topics in the future. So what I plan to kind of briefly go over today is a whirlwind of what is science communication, spend probably the bulk of the time talking about why you should do science communication, and sort of debunking some of the myths of why you shouldn't do it, and then end with some tips and tricks on how to get started. So the first thing I want to do is tell you a little bit more about myself. The introduction sort of hit the highlights, but I do this for two reasons. One, so that you know why I am here talking to you about science communication, a little bit more of that background, but then also because it's tip and trick number one, to always make sure your audience knows why you're there and why you were asked or chosen or volunteered to be the speaker on whatever the topic is. Don't just assume people know your expertise. So sort of walking the walk and talking the talk as I introduce myself a little bit more. As Leo said, I'm faculty at the med school, but I am a Brown School trainee, MSWA and PhD there, and was an NIMH T32 pre-doc. And for those who are in the program, especially in the pre-doc stage, now after being out of, I graduated in 2017, so it's been 4 or 5 years. It's such a great program to prepare you for a research career. I have a lot of colleagues who didn't get the training, especially on grants and just getting the exposure to grant writings. And I got that through the T32 program. So really looking back, grateful that I had that opportunity. It's helped me immensely over the years. And as Leo said, I'm an implementation scientist with a focus on older adults and other vulnerable populations. Right now, I'm mostly in the dementia and rural space, so 2 very vulnerable groups. But I have a whole other previous life as a journalist. As Leo said, my bachelor's degree is in journalism. I was just a newspaper reporter. Like, that was it for me. I thought that was going to be my career. When I graduated, I was working here locally in St. Louis, and that was my plan. I had no aspirations for any more education. Was glad to just be a writer because I really enjoy writing. This was at a time when newspapers were starting to dwindle, as was the economy. So I had to make a move and find another position, and that's what led me into research. But I do have this whole life of being trained as a journalist and being a journalist, and it's really helpful as now an academic because I have that perspective from the other side of what journalists and the media are looking for and what they sort of expect in a give and take with an interview. And I think as much as I can share that perspective with academics, I think it helps sort of demystify what's on the other side of a newspaper or a TV news spot. Also, I could spend a whole hour talking about policy. I'm only going to touch a little bit on it today. But as Leo said, I did just not that long ago finish up a year-long fellowship in DC in the Senate, working for the Senate Special Committee on Aging. That's a screen grab of me looking very serious for some reason, sitting behind the senator I worked for, Senator Bob Casey. He was the ranking member. He was the Democrat lead on the committee. Now he's the chair because they took back control. So that's exciting. But I worked as a staffer essentially, and similar to the journalism experience, it's given me the perspective of what policymakers, what their roles look like, how they use science and research in their policymaking process. That's the reason I did the fellowship, is I wanted to see from the other side how policymakers use science and research. And I got that experience. And now I feel like I have a good idea of how we as academics can better advocate for policy change and communicate with policymakers about our research and science. And I also do science communication. I don't just have the training and sort of the background, but I actively try and do it as much as I can. And I have a couple of screen grabs here, and I chose them for a couple of reasons. Number one, COVID makes science communication, like scientists are having a moment with COVID, so you can actually get in easier than I think you could before COVID because everybody wants to talk to a scientist or a researcher. I had a piece in the HuffPost in December go viral, which then got me invited to be on CNN and NBC. And that was, you'll have people who are on there all the time. That is not me. Like, this is the one time I'll probably ever be on there. But I put that on there to show that, yes, you can do the big stuff, but I think I have far more of an impact when I write for local media sources. And so you'll see at the bottom, there's an op-ed I wrote in the Springfield News Leader, which is the newspaper in Springfield, Missouri, which is where all of our state elected officials go and live. So that's sort of the newspaper they read on a day-to-day basis. Graham Colditz, if you know him from WashU, he's an important cancer researcher and physician. He writes a lot of op-eds there, specifically for getting the attention of state policymakers. And so that's a place, that was, not as hard to get into as HuffPost, but I think has a bigger impact. Same thing with the Southern Illinoisan. It's the newspaper in Southern Illinois, and I'm from there. And I wrote an op-ed about sort of the need for community leaders to speak up about following COVID guidelines. And I think that did far more in terms of a real world impact than, my 10-minute talk with Michael Holmes on CNN. So I say that to say you don't have to be on CNN or NBC to make an impact, and you make far greater of an impact, I think, if you stay local. So we'll start with just a brief 2 slides about what science communication is, because we'll talk about that more at the end when I talk about the tips and tricks. But the name in itself, I think, is a little bit mysterious for folks. They think it is just getting on CNN or writing an op-ed, and it's much more than that. So I really like this definition from the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine. And they have what they say are 5 goals for science communication. So they are: 1, to share recent science findings and build excitement for science; 2, increase public appreciation for science; increase knowledge and understanding of science; influence the opinions, policy preferences, or behaviors of people; and ensure that a diversity of perspectives about science are considered when societal problems are pursued. And I love these 5 points, because it is not, science communication is not just about writing op-eds and getting on TV or getting interviewed. I mean, that's certainly a part of it, and that's fun, but you can do a lot in the science communication sort of umbrella that isn't engaging with the media, and we'll talk about that towards the end. And so I put this up there and want to kind of drive home that if you see things about writing an op-ed and you think, I'm never going to do that, I'm not comfortable with it, whatever, I'm going to try and get you to be more comfortable with it. But just know that there are lots of other things that you can do that are considered science communication. One example, when I was thinking about this the other day, looking at these slides, the sort of number 2 and number 3 and number 1. So pre-pandemic, when we actually still did things in the world, there's an organization, it's a national organization called 500 Women Scientists. And it's a just pro women as scientists and researchers organization. St. Louis has a really big chapter, and they had an event on like a Thursday night at the Schlafly Tap Room, where women scientists came and set up experiments for kids to come and play with, and just like, have a beer with a scientist at the bar. And it was great. It was, people would come and just want to talk to scientists. And it wasn't, there were of course structured experiments, but I don't have experiments to do with kids. So I just hung out at a table that was like meet the scientist table, and had conversations with random people, trying to explain implementation. Like, if you want to learn how to explain your field, go to the Schlafly Tap Room on a Thursday night and just talk to random people who are drinking and try and get your field understood by them. It's a great training and how to get your elevator pitch down. But I had a great experiment or great conversation with this guy who was a restaurant owner, and I'm talking about implementation science, and he's like, yeah, it's like when my employees, I tell them not to, go through new cups every time somebody wants a drink, but then they told me they have to because the customer's watching and the customer wants a new glass. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's a barrier. And here's a strategy. And so, it was really, that's science communication, showing up, being there and talking. And that's a really important point to number 5 is science communication is about making sure that the scientists that you see are not just white men, as they traditionally have been. And so if you are not a white man, it's really even more important to be out there and be the face of science and be the face of research, so that younger folks can see themselves in science. So there are lots of goals to science communication other than writing an op-ed and promoting your work. Carl agrees. So what is science communication more tangibly? It's things like writing a blog post, creating a website, an op-ed, visiting your elected officials, giving a talk to a local organization like the Schlafly Taproom thing, and getting active on Twitter. We're going to circle back to a lot of these at the end when I give some tips and tricks for how to do some of these things, but hopefully you just gleaned from the first part, there's anything that's contributing to the public's understanding of science and appreciation of science, and showing that science can be done by a diverse range of people is science communication. So I want to spend the bulk of the time talking about why do science communication. And again, this is perfect if this is your first step into this area, because I talk to people all the time. I was just emailing one of my mentors over the weekend, explaining Twitter to him. And he was like, I don't know, so I know that there's a lot of pushback on why academics should do science communication. And I hope to at least move you a little closer into the field of doing it if you're one of those laggards in the implementation science world. So I thought I'd structure this into sort of, like I said earlier, debunking some of the myths of why people don't do science communication, why academics don't look beyond the academy. And we'll go through these each slide by slide, but the big thing I think I hear is we don't think it's our job. Like, I'm a scientist. I'm not, I don't do that. That's not me. That's not my job. We don't get rewarded for it, which has some truth to it, which we'll talk about. I think the probably, if not the biggest, it's number two, is we're too type A and we don't know how to do it. We don't know where to do it. And we like to be right. And we like to know everything and not put ourselves in positions of still learning a new skill. So we just are like, no, I'm uncomfortable being uncomfortable. And so I'm not going to put myself out there and sort of do something different. And we have to get over that if we're going to be effective scientists, I think. So we'll go through these, like I said, one by one. The first one, we don't think it's our job. I would ask you, if you find yourself saying that my job is to do the science. I'm a researcher. I am somebody who is going to ask important questions and find the truth and find the answer. And that is my lane. And that's where I am comfortable being. And it's not my job to go beyond that. I'm trained as a scientist. If you find yourself saying that, I would ask you to ask yourself, well, why are you doing the science at all? And what impact do you want your science to have? And my guess is, speaking with folks who are, at the Brown School, there's likely an answer to those that is beyond the pursuit of knowledge. You likely want to improve people's lives, improve a community, solve, a real world problem that is really affecting real world people. We're not bench scientists. We're not in it just for sort of creating new methodologies of petri dishes. We are usually in this because we want to have real world impact. And you have to go beyond just academia to have a real world impact. So if you don't think it's your job, but you actually want to make real world impact, you need to accept that science communication is part of that job. It is how you have a real world impact. So you don't get to say it's not part of your job, because your job is to have real world impact. So what we do what we do because we want to make things better, and we can make things better doing science communication. So we don't get rewarded for it. This is true, sort of. It is true. If you look at promotion and tenure committees, what do you get graded on? It's not science communication explicitly. And so there is truth to, you're not going to get weighed as heavily by doing a lot of science communication if you don't also do the traditional stuff like publish papers in academic journals and get grants. It's true. But it's starting to change. I do think, and I sort of being interested in this field, have heard of a lot of schools coming more on board with the importance of science communication and having real world impact. Promotion and tenure committees are starting to recognize it. I know at the medical school, they're talking about revising all of their promotion and tenure department-wide criteria to include more. They're not necessarily going as far as science communication, but they're saying team science and things that are allowing you more wiggle room to get promoted and get recognition beyond just the traditional ways. So I think we're getting there. When I was at Vanderbilt, the Department of Anesthesiology actually hired as faculty somebody who was a former broadcast news reporter to help them think through how they can integrate science communication into their promotion and tenure requirements, because they were very committed to making it something that faculty did get recognized for, and they were, as just a department, they were going to make that change. So it's coming around. But I told somebody the other day, I don't want to be the guinea pig on things, like, because I have a career and I need to keep a roof over my head. So I get it if you're like, great, Beth, but call me when all the P&T committees have changed their minds, and then I'll start doing it. There are benefits that can be tangible academic benefits, products that come out of science communication. Even if the science communication itself doesn't go on your CV, you can get lines on your CV by doing science communication. And we'll come back to this at the end, because I actually posted this question to Twitter and got some great responses. So I think the big thing is you get new colleagues and collaborators. I've definitely met people who I'm now actively working on academic pursuits with. I met them through being on Twitter at conferences, and then getting connected to them, or finding other people who want to co-write science communication pieces together who are maybe a little more sort of important than I am, and I'm riding their coattails, and they're happy to let me do that. So you can definitely meet new academic colleagues and collaborators doing this. Institutions like it, and again, you know, your institution liking you isn't something ideally you get promoted for, but it doesn't hurt. For example, when CNN, was it CNN and NBC, when NBC wanted to interview me, you know, they didn't reach out to me. They rightfully so went through the medical school's public affairs office and said, hey, we saw that one of your faculty wrote this article in the HuffPost and we would like to interview her. So then medical public affairs reached out to me and said, hey, they want to interview you. This is great. What can we do to help? We can't wait to see it. Make sure you send it to us. We'll promote it. So obviously universities and institutions like when they can tout their employees as somebody who's featured on CNN or a frequent contributor to the New York Times. Again, it doesn't probably help you get promoted, but it probably, like, I like to think that if the dean knows my name, that's not a bad thing if they can, you know that I exist. So it's good job security in a way. And then if you don't plan to necessarily be in academia where you are so focused on NIH grants, or you like to have a secondary pot of you know, research funding coming in that's from foundations. Foundations love to have their grantees be involved in science communication and be out there. It's similar to institutions, you know, the John A. Hartford Foundation, which funds a lot of geriatric work. Like they love if they can point to somebody in the news who's talking about, you know, their research that was funded by the John A. Hartford Foundation, or that they're a John A. Hartford fellow. You know, they want that. It helps them get more donors. They then like to give you more money because you are sort of benefiting them as well. So if you have any interest in getting foundational funding, which, you know, given NIH climate often is the case, you need to supplement with foundation funding. They really, really like it. And it's good to not just wait until you get the grant to start doing it. Start doing it now, and then that brings you into the funders sort of field of vision. And then the last part, we are too type A. We don't know how to do this. We don't know where to start. So we just don't want to do it because it makes us anxious. It's true. We aren't trained in this. So you will be anxious. You will feel like you don't know what you're doing, and you'll feel like it's not something you're qualified to do, and it's better left to the experts. And that is all true. But it doesn't mean you can't learn to do it. You just have to be comfortable being uncomfortable when you start. You have to be comfortable, just like when you learn any new research skill. Like, you're not trained in it, you have to stumble through it. And the more you do it, the easier it gets, the better you get at it. So saying that, you know, you don't want to do it because you don't know how to do it is true up until a point, but then you need to take the effort to learn how to do it. And so it sounds like with this new initiative, you all are going to be learning to do it. So hopefully in a year, you will no longer feel like you aren't trained to do it. So to sort of summarize, you know, like I said at the beginning, I think we have an ethical, moral obligation to doing science communication. I look at it in a lot of other ways as, even if it doesn't benefit your career, like, it's good human behavior to try and help people and make your work have a real world impact. So I do it even if I don't necessarily see the career impact, but I think I have an ethical, moral obligation to be more engaged with the public and break down sort of the ivory tower that we're all in. No one will do it for you. And if you want your work to have impact, it's got to be you. You know, medical public affairs reached out to me and said, hey, let us know if you need anything, but they're not doing the interview for me. They're not pushing my HuffPost article out there. So you have to do it. And if you don't do it, and this was a point somebody he's a professor at Columbia, he's an MD, and he goes on Fox News all the time to sort of talk about science. He's an infectious disease doctor. He's the doctor that got Ebola. So he was like really big in the news. And we had him here at WashU early in the pandemic to talk about science communication. And he said, if you don't do it, someone else is going to go and talk on that interview or write that op-ed. And they may not be the expert that you are. They may have ulterior motives that are not to just sort of get the truth out there. So I also look at it, if I don't go out there and do it, I can't guarantee who else will step into my place. And so not knowing who's going to be there makes me want to get out there and do it. And then you can learn to do it well. As I said, it's going to feel uncomfortable at the beginning, but you absolutely can do it. You don't need to have a journalism background or work in the Senate to be able to do these things. And I just covered that. Okay, so now we'll briefly talk about some science communication tips and tricks. I have a whole half-day workshop on these things. Rebecca has sat in on it at CERC a couple of years ago, so I could deep dive, and I love to deep dive into these things. We're going to highlight the big points. If you have an interest in deep diving, like, let me know, I'll send you some resources, but we'll just talk about the highlights, the general principles. I think no matter where you're doing science communication, the biggest and sort of the one thing you got to get right, if you get nothing else right, is you have to communicate clearly using non-technical language. It is a science and an art to not be a scientist. You have to just really get it out of your head that that you need to be as technical as you are in academia. Not only will people not understand it, but they don't care. Like, I have talked to so many people who are very bright and know exactly what, the technical aspects of science and p-values and they're like, just give me the bottom line. Just give me the bottom line. I don't need all of the limitations. I don't need all of the sample sizes and things. Just tell me what sort of to do. Tailoring to the audience is also generally important, and not just the audience, in terms of like education level and reading level, but what is the thing that you want them to take away? If you're talking to an audience of policymakers who can actually do something, you need to have that be your frame for when you're speaking with them. If you're talking to some group of people at a bar at Schlafly who you just want to educate and maybe pique some interest in science, you need to have that as your frame as you go in. The third point is, I think, hugely important, to not hedge, but don't get out over your skis. As I said, most of the time when I'm talking to people, especially policymakers and their staff who are very smart and who understand science, they just want you to tell them what they need to do. Tell me what the policy is I need to write. Tell me what the answer is. And as academics, we're so trained to not say anything, concrete. Like, we want to give you our full list of limitations ahead of time. We want to tell you why we need more research and like, please don't do anything with this because it was a single site they don't care about that. And so you need to be comfortable sort of stating what you think needs to be done and trusting your own expertise and trusting that the literature and that you can give some solid advice on what needs to be done, but also don't get out over your skis and talk about things you aren't confident you have the expertise to be talking about. And that goes to the next point, to be confident but not pompous. I think the worst thing you can do if you're doing science communication is to answer a question that you don't actually know the answer to. If you don't know the answer to something, you genuinely don't feel comfortable giving an opinion, just say that. Say, I'm not, I see Dr. Fauci all the time doing that. Of course, he's sort of our poster child of science communication right now. He says, I'd just be guessing and I don't want to guess. So I'm not going to give you an answer to that. And that does so much more to build science communication than actually giving an answer that may not be right. So you have to be confident that you are an expert and that you can say something, but don't feel like you have to answer every question. And then the last point, bring your whole self. This is more for Twitter, which we'll talk about in a second. It goes to that last point from the National Academies of showing diversity in who is a scientist. I think it doesn't help people. Like, I'm a first gen sort of from a small town. Like, if I looked at scientists and thought, oh, gosh, they're just so professional, and like, I'm not professional enough to be. So it's good to be open about your cats and your hobbies and all of these things that make you more human. Because if, again, the purpose of science communication is to really help build interest in science and build that bridge between science and the real world, we need to look like real people. And so bring your whole self to the table. All right, quick couple of slides on kind of different outlets for science communication. Things about engaging with the media. So this would be writing an op-ed, or being on TV or something like that. So the nice thing about the media and writing for the media is you can jump in right now. Like, you can all tonight write a letter to the editor. They're like max 200 words. I'm sure there's something that you think you would like people to know and that they should do. So you can jump into this immediately, as opposed to policy advocacy. Maybe you want to take a couple days to prepare, but you could write a letter to the editor tonight. So it's something you can jump into. Usually when you're writing something like a blog post or an op-ed or a letter to the editor, you're advocating for something. These aren't just background literature reviews. You kind of have to have a point at the end to say, and this is why X, Y, and Z needs to happen. It doesn't have to be something controversial. Like you don't have to wait for, a major like topic of abortion or gun control or something to be, it can be very sort of mundane, but still very important, and not something that, is a hot topic, but something that people maybe aren't thinking about that they need to be thinking about. So don't wait for the moment, because the moment is now. Just jump in. Tying your topic to a current event, though, is super helpful. And I have a couple of examples on the next slide. So if you're wanting to write for a broad outlet like the Post-Dispatch, if you can tie it to a current event, tie your area of interest to a current event, then it's more likely the paper is going to publish it because they're like, oh, this is relevant to current times. This is happening right now. This will make people, our readership will be more engaged. You can get away with current event stuff if you go to a niche outlet. Like I've written a number of blogs for Academy Health, which is the academic professional society for health services researchers. Obviously, they are interested in health services research any day. And so you don't need necessarily a current event to tie your research to be able to write for a niche outlet. But if you're wanting to go public, try and tie it to a current event. So let me show you what I mean by that real quick. So I love this example. It's from a couple of years ago. It's, I think, in the New York Times. So that, the headline is, "A giant volcano could end human life on Earth as we know it." It's an op-ed about climate change. But the first paragraph, the very first sentence, the lead, as they call it, says, "If you're planning to visit Yellowstone National Park this Labor Day weekend, I have good news. It's very, very unlikely a volcano." So they tied it to the upcoming Labor Day weekend. And the articles about climate change and volcanoes and whatever, I don't remember, but they use that hook of like, hey, Labor Day this weekend, if you happen to be out in Yellowstone, you're not going to get blown up. So that's the kind of tying it to communication or tying it to local events that I'm talking about. This is a more recent one. The title, "The COVID Pandemic Has Given Us a Roadmap to Transform Education for the Better." The op-ed was all about how to improve the education system. Improvements that had nothing to do with COVID, improvements that needed to be done pre-COVID and should be done post-COVID. And they're using the COVID pandemic as a way to tie their advocacy for education reform into current events. They're saying, hey, COVID's changed education. Now let's talk about all these things that they've very likely been saying before this and are going to continue saying it. So that's what I say when what I mean when I say tie it to a current event. It makes the topic more interesting to readers, and then because of that, people will be more likely to publish it. I wanted to make sure I just added a couple of things here. It doesn't hurt to shoot your shot. I have sent in so many op-eds to the Washington Post and the New York Times. I've yet to be published in them, but you get rejected in like a day or two and you move on. So like nobody's tracking your rejects, and you should just submit and shoot your shot. But you do have a better chance of starting small and going local. And like I said, I think that's where you make a bigger impact anyway. If you're interested in submitting something to a particular publication, before you do that, read what that publication publishes, read types of articles that are going to be similar to yours. You'll get a sense of what they've already published and how they like their pieces to come, what kind of style. Pay attention to how the outlet prefers you receive the writing. So some places want you to just send a pitch, a 3-sentence, here's what I'm going to write about. Do you want me to write the full piece or not? Some places want you to submit the full piece already written. So just this information's on each publication's website, so you can usually find it. Get feedback from others before you submit it, preferably not your academic colleagues. Give it to people who are not in academia, who are going to be like the target audience, and let them red pen it up and then revise based on their feedback. And this goes to the point of being too type A. Just try and try again. Like, you do not get penalized for submitting to the Washington Post every day and then rejecting you every day. They don't know who you are. They don't care. They're not tracking you. Just try, just keep putting yourself out there. And the more you build your skills and the more you get published, the more likely you are to keep getting published. All right, so quickly about policymakers. this is a different type of science communication, obviously, but the focus or the principles are still the same. Here, you are usually doing this in person. You're usually going to meet with somebody. You're going to a Hill day, they call it, where professional societies might take their members up to the Hill to meet with policymakers, or you can just meet with local policymakers as a constituent. But it's usually something more done in person where you're not actually writing something. So it's about learning how to have a conversation that is very clear and direct and pointed and has a ask at the end, as I say there at the last thing. So the one thing I want to point out that's I think a misconception, I certainly had it before I went to DC. I thought, well, we've just got to get policymakers to want to use research in their science, in their policy making. They just don't appreciate it. At least where I was, like, they absolutely appreciate it. They want to write evidence-based policy. They just don't have the time to sift through a whole field of literature to figure out what the answer is, nor do they have the time to sort of, read a bunch of papers or watch a bunch of webinars. Like, they just don't have the time to figure it out. So they absolutely want to hear from academics. They want to hear our experiences and our expertise. They are eager for that. But you have to learn how to do it quickly and directly. If you're a constituent, take advantage of meeting with your elected officials. You don't have to meet with them and talk about, how they need to cut down the dead tree at the end of your block before it knocks the power line down. Like, you can, as a constituent, ask for a meeting. You'll be more likely to get it, and then use that time to talk about whatever sort of issue you care about and have expertise to be talking about. Ask for the meeting. Just introduce yourself as an academic, as an expert. Let them know that you're in the community. You'd be happy to help, provide expertise, provide witness testimony, whatever they want. But don't just have the meeting and say, like, now you know who I am, let me know if you need me. Make sure you have an ask at the end. That is, I think, the one thing that I saw staffers get so annoyed with, and it didn't happen much because the people coming to the Hill knew this. Have an ask. Make sure at the end you have some concrete thing you want the policymaker to do. It doesn't have to be doable, but you need to be able to say, this is why I'm meeting with you, because I want you to enact X, Y, and Z policy, or I really think something needs to be done about X, Y, and Z. So it's not just about sort of having the meet and greet, it's about having the meet and greet and then having an ask at the end. All right, and then lastly, mostly going to talk about Twitter, but I wanted to talk about engaging the public through social media. I put the World Wide Web logo on there because I do think a very easy first step for science communication is to create your own website. If you don't have your own personal website, not personal and like, here's my cat pictures, but like personal and your personal professional, not tied to an institution website, I highly recommend doing that, especially because you're all trainees. You're likely going to be moving around institutions a lot, especially early in your career. And if your only web presence is tied to your institution, which is usually like 6 months to a year late in getting any information on you up on their website, and it's usually just a paragraph that just tells about your research interests, that's hard for people in the media to find you. It's hard for the public to find you. So create a website. I don't know, I think I pay like $200 every 2 years for a domain name and Wix site. And I put my publications up there. I put my social, my science communication publications up there. And it's just a place that if a journalist Googles me, they can find all of my information, all of my life story up there. If the public wants to read my papers, if they're open source, like the links are right there. So it's just a good communication tool to aid in all of these other aspects. Twitter is, I think, the thing that most people think of when they think of social media and science communication. I love Twitter. It helps with everything we've already discussed. It helps you meet those colleagues. It helps you, meet policymakers. It helps you advocate for policy, helps you find journalists and outlets to write for. And it has real, tangible, traditional academic benefits to it. And so I actually last Friday, I think, tweeted out to what they call academic Twitter and said, hey, I'm giving this presentation next week. Can you all share benefits that you have found using Twitter for science communication? And they had, I'm going to pop out and I have to stop, I think, sharing screen and switch to the other screen real quick. But I wanted you all to see their responses because they're great. Let's see, here we go. All right, are you seeing Twitter now? Okay, so I asked this, Is it loading? Ugh, hang on. Now I have to get back to the. Your pictures are in the way. Okay, so I asked everybody on Twitter to respond, and I got a lot of great examples. So somebody said, you know, Twitter can help draw attendees to your presentations, eyeballs to your publications. Maggie Paddock, who many of you probably know at the Brown School, she said, you know, she crowdsourced a question about the pros and cons of different qualitative software. And somebody reached out and like put her in touch with their staff who was able to give very concrete information on like which qualitative software is better. Somebody said, you know, down here that, where was it? I submitted an abstract to a symposium I only learned about through Twitter, thought it was a super long shot, but I was invited to give the talk, and then I was invited to write a review based on my talk. So Twitter was directly, you can see the thread line there. Somebody said they learned about other students who were writing F31s, so they started an F31 peer group. Somebody says they got elected to a leadership position because of Twitter name recognition. They got invited to do talks at conferences and on advisory boards, meeting and collaborating on projects with people that they've never met in person. I was invited to speak at a university because the organizer found me on Twitter. So lots of examples, and you know, this link, you can find it, obviously it's public, it's in the slide deck. Lots of examples of, you know, how you can use Twitter to actually get academic benefits that are, you know, going to be able to be put on your CV. And I can attest to everything that they're saying. I have definitely gotten invited to give talks. I have gotten, you know, paper collaborations and grant collaborations just because people recognize my name from Twitter and know who I am. So a couple quick things about Twitter. You know, the idea with Twitter is you have to use it to get something out of it. You can't be a lurker. You can't just get on there and like read other people's tweets and then never engage. Doesn't help you, and it can definitely be creepy. So get out there, engage with people. It's not just a tool for promoting yourself. I mean, you can and you should, but also promote others. Have those conversations. If somebody posts a new article that they just published, it's your opportunity to talk with the author, and that author will respond. And now you know that author, and that author knows your name. And so it's you've got to actually have the conversations. Somebody once called it the new faculty lounge, and I totally agree. It's the way to sort of meet people and have conversations, and also be yourself and show your personality. Again, you want to make yourself look like a real human and not a bot that just tweets out paper articles. Oops. All right. Lastly, for Twitter, just basic things. You know, if you're going to publish or you're going to tweet out your new journal article, create a quick infographic. I don't mean like graphic designing for an hour. I mean like, boom, make some colorful blocks, take a screenshot of it, and put that out with your tweet. Pictures are greater than words. You know, that tweet can be retweeted a lot better if it's got a nice graphic to it versus just like a hyperlink to your article. Be ready at conferences. That's, I think, the greatest way to use academic Twitter. Most conferences now have hashtags. If you go to the Implementation Science Conference, I mean, and you're on Twitter, people are retweeting, you know, pictures of your presentation, or you're having conversations, all using that Twitter hashtag for the conference. And you want to be a part of that community. That definitely helps build your networks. Use trending topics to get noticed. I think back in like the 2016 presidential election, can't remember, there was some debate going on, and I used the debate hashtag to like pivot to talking about like healthcare or something, you know, like people who are on Twitter searching for the debate were going to see my tweet because I used the debate hashtag. So it's the same idea as the newspapers, you know, use the current trending topics to tag your tweet and sort of make it relevant to that topic. And then use the relevant hashtags and key accounts. So anytime I tweet, you know, if it's implementation science, I use hashtag ImpSci. If it's aging research, I make sure to include hashtag aging research, and that helps build visibility to the tweet and lets people know like, hey, Beth is an implementation scientist. I'm going to follow her for more implementation science content. All right, I think we have now, okay, right around time. So that is the last, I'm going to end the show, but if we need to go back to the slides, you know, I'm happy to pull those back up. If I can find the...
Awesome. This is wonderful, Beth. Thank you so much. And if do you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask them or put them on the chat. I must tell you, I was very not participating much in science communication for many years. And I wrote an open-ed piece that was asked for of a good friend of mine for the Puerto Rico, for El Nuevo Dia, which is a big newspaper in Puerto Rico. And I wrote this piece, very personal piece about mental illness, experiences with suicide and suicide in our family. And it was super powerful. Like just the amount of feedback we got and all this conversation that started was really powerful. And it was a good friend of mine that does a lot of science communication. He has a whole sort of organization called Ciencia Puerto Rico, which is exactly bringing Puerto Rican scientists to the conversation of policy and social issues in the US and in Puerto Rico, and basically showing the Puerto Rican community, here's Puerto Rican scientists really contributing to different areas of science. It's been extremely powerful. So I was very moved by that process. It was really sort of putting yourself out there and not knowing what's going to happen, but it was really powerful. And after that, I've continued to do so. So and it was putting ourselves out there, like your personal serve. So I really appreciate that, Beth. So other comments, guys, of thoughts or questions you have for Beth?
I will echo. I think you're absolutely right. And I saw Rebecca put the HuffPost article. You know, if you read that, it's a little bit about my research and my science, but it's mostly about me personally. And I think it resonates a lot more with people than just like your expertise. So you have to find the way to balance and bring, like I said, your whole self into your pieces. You don't have, we don't usually mention that stuff in our academic articles. Probably rightfully so, but it's very important in science communication and resonates more with people and helps build that visibility and just, I think, breaks down those preconceived notions of what a scientist is and what a scientist talks about.
And also, I'm teaching a theory class this semester, and actually one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at all these guest speakers who are all over the world and looking at their CVs. And it's been interesting. A couple of them have shared with us sort of their paper and how they're including their science communication in their CVs and for their tenure package. Yeah. And for some of them, it's been fascinating to see how one paper, they put a footnote. For example, Mike McKenzie at McGill University had 2 papers that blew up, like they were massive impact in the field of pediatric and child maltreatment. And he documents in his CV very nicely the links of how it was done, the media picked it up, the conversations that happened, and it really highlighted the impact that specific article had in this whole space in a very simple way in his CV.
That's a great
that difference. So I found it fascinating to elevate it in a 10-year process, because that's what where you're going to evaluate it on in many ways. Yeah.
Dang it, Beth. Your argument was even stronger this time.
Get on Twitter.
The ethical obligation like really gets. Yeah.
I think if we're all like, we're at the Brown School, so of course we want to make the world a better place. We're not people who got into this just to do science. We got into it probably because we cared about something. And I don't know, to me, it feels like you would just, you've got to do it because you've got to be that voice. No one else is going to do it for you, or it's going to be people who should not be doing it, who should, be taking a back seat. So
I think just like the point about representation, really, Beth and I have had this Twitter conversation for a very long time, and I think you finally got me.
It's yeah, and somebody, I didn't show it it was one of the comments in response to my tweet that I actually loved. Somebody said, I'm able to hear about issues affecting my broad sense of the word colleagues at other institutions that maybe aren't at my own institution that I know of, but now I can raise the awareness at my own institution. So she said, she was learning from her colleagues of color about sort of the things that they were experiencing. These were colleagues at other institutions that she only kind of was reading on Twitter. And she was able to take that back to her own department and say, hey, are we doing these things here? Because I'm seeing that these are issues at other places and we need to address them here. So it gives you such a broad view of academia and what other people who are not in your institution it's also a really safe place, I think, to ask questions, because you'll have people who only tweet about their papers and like make it look like they're great. But for the most part, people tweet all the time about their failures, about their imposter syndrome, about the challenges they have. And people are so willing to jump in and help. I asked about, I'm resubmitting a grant, and I said, hey, Twitter, I need to put in some rural health training opportunities. What ones do you know about? And people emailed me, people were sending me links, like people want to help. It is a really nice supportive community. And somebody else said in the response to that point, Rebecca, that they said, if you're from a non-traditional community not traditionally represented community in academia, you can find others just like you on Twitter that you maybe would have no way to find outside of Twitter. So being out there, I think, helps somebody else see that, oh yeah, I can do that because that person's there.
And I want to highlight something that you mentioned, Beth, because it's something that's happening at Washington University right now, which is the importance of keeping up your web presence accessible, clear what you do, and either a website or your personal thing. We've been having this discussion at Washington University, the lack of representation of minority scholars being asked by the public relations to talk about disparities, inequities, and things like that. And the public, and it's not for the public relation people. They're searching the faculty website, and nothing comes out. And these are the only two people that are available. So it's really important, and to connect with your public relations person at the institution that you're working on, making sure they know who you are, making sure what you're willing to address. Be careful, of course. I was at the University of Southern California for many years, and the public relation person realized I'm a Latino, I can talk about mental health, and every freaking news that happened in LA or in Southern California around mental health and Latina, I was called upon, and so you get bombarded as well with opportunities. So just balance that out clearly. But it's really important creating those connections. At the Brown School, we have a sort of great, I have positive and negative things to say, but it's good to, if you have your work, put it out there, send it to the public relation person, and then advocate for getting it out there. And most of the time it will move forward. Sometimes it doesn't, but you keep trying to do so.
Yeah, one of my colleagues does a wonderful thing, and I've just not done it yet. So I'm not perfect. She creates a little, just 1 minute YouTube video. If she has a new paper come out, she makes a YouTube video and just says in 1 to 2 minutes, here's what we found, here's what we did. It's very plain language. And then she posts that YouTube video on her website. So a random person can just sort of get a really quick idea of what she studies. They don't have to read anything. They can just click, boom, 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 watch all the videos. And now they've learned something. It takes time, but it's a great way to have that web presence, especially if somebody wants to interview you, they can get a clear sense if you're able to communicate and be on camera.
That's excellent.
I know.
Yeah. What about, have you participated in podcasts? That's another medium that's evolving. Yeah.
I've been interviewed. I haven't done, obviously don't have my own podcast. I've been interviewed many times, and to me, doing a radio interview, a podcast, or a TV interview, I struggle. Clearly, I'm a hand talker. I'm like a very animated face, and that's like on TV. I sit on my hands and I try and keep my face not really animated. On the radio or on a podcast, it's a little different, but you still have to be. It goes to that very first point I said that crosses all science communication: is be a clear communicator without jargon. And I told, so over the summer, actually, I was interviewed for St. Louis Public Radio with an undergrad student who was working for me, and it was her first ever anything. So we had a little practice, prep session. And I told her, I was like, you're going to be on the radio, so just write down what you want to say. And if you get anxious and you start to stumble over your words, they're not going to see you reading off the notes. So just, have that fallback that you can use. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to just off the cuff say wonderful things. Write out what you want to say, read through it a bunch of times. So you go into autopilot if you get anxious and need to. And to your point, Leo, the public relations people at your institutions will help you with that. That was once the medical public affairs contacted me and said, NBC wants to interview you, their next question was, do you need help? Do you want to practice? Because they don't want you going out there not doing well either. So they are there to help you and talk through that kind of stuff. If you do get invited for an interview, you don't have to just show up and speak off the cuff. You can prepare and practice, and it does get easier as you do more and more of them. But podcasts absolutely are a huge, they're definitely the thing now. I'm an old fart with podcasts and like very rarely listen to ones unless they're about murder. I love true crime.
I like more positive things. I've never gotten into the murder ones.
I know, it's
like,
horrible. All I do.
Can't.
It's not healthy. Yes, crime junkie.
Cool. Crime junkies. Yeah, no crime junkies on that side, Rebecca. All right. Other questions, guys? We have about 2 minutes left.
I had a question. So right now we're still trying to shape our, professional brand. So in thinking about all these different avenues we can take, do you have a recommendation what we should like focus on first?
Yeah, Twitter. Sorry, Rebecca, but Twitter is so great when you're junior. I mean, I joined Twitter, I think I was a PhD student. I think I was first year, second year. I was at a conference. There's this physician at the med school, Chris Carpenter. He's an emergency medicine physician, and he's prolific on Twitter. And he came up to me at the conference and he took a picture of my poster and he's like, "I'm going to tweet it. What's your handle?" And I was like, I had one, but I'd only used it to ask food trucks where they were going to be. And I was like, I can't have this guy who's got thousands of Twitter followers tweeting out my academic professional poster. And then you go to my page and it's like, where's Taco Truck Tuesday this year? So I was like, hold on. And I created a brand new Twitter account where I could like be more professional and like have it be my brand. And from then it really just built and built and built. And I think it definitely the name recognition on Twitter of people knowing, just seeing your name. And then when they're at conferences, they're like, "Oh, I know that name." And I've done this to people and people have done this to me. They come up and they're like, "I follow you on Twitter," or like, "I see your tweets." We don't ever meet in real life, but we like until that moment, but we feel like we know each other because we're on Twitter. The other thing is people are so gracious on Twitter and academics. People tweet, if you say like, "Hey, I'm on the job market. Here's my expertise. Here's when I'm graduating. Here's the position I'm looking for," that can go viral and you can get all sorts of exposure for positions, postdocs or fellowships or whatever. And people are really willing to promote junior people. Also the support of being junior, I'm junior faculty. So I ask a lot of questions about things all the time and people are very willing to offer their sort of expertise being further down the road than I am. So I think Twitter is the absolute best place to start and build the brand and build the network. And I think if you start on Twitter, the rest will come easier.
That's awesome. So we need to stop here. Beth, thank you so much for your time and your great work. This is a great way to start. I couldn't ask for we didn't plan this at all.
Yeah, it was just the one I was available for.
It worked out perfectly. So we will continue. Please reach out to Beth if you have other questions.
I just put my email in the chat.
Excellent. And thank you so much for your time. And we'll continue this this series throughout this semester and the upcoming years as well. So thank you so much for showing up.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
We appreciate you for your time, Beth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Thank you so much, everyone. And have a good rest of your day. Bye.